Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video, commenting where you're watching from and at what time, and subscribing to keep these chilling stories coming. Now, let's dive into these unsettling tales. My name is Rachel, and I'm 17 years old. I'm sure you've probably heard of people telling stories about how they had to babysit some creepy kid, or how something strange happened while they were watching someone else's house. But trust me, I never imagined anything like this would ever happen to me. I always thought those stories were just exaggerated or overhyped. But the thing is, this wasn't a made-up story. It was real, and I've never been able to forget what happened that night. It all started on a crisp Saturday evening, the kind of night when you can feel fall creeping in. The air was cool, but not too cold, just that perfect temperature where it's chilly enough to make you pull your jacket a little tighter, but not enough to make you shiver. I had just gotten home from the high school football game, feeling the usual mix of excitement and adrenaline from the event. I'd been planning to spend the night in, maybe catch up on some schoolwork or watch a movie, but then my mom handed me a message from one of our neighbors. Apparently, a family from a couple of blocks away needed a last-minute babysitter. I was about to say no. After all, I had just gotten home and was ready to relax, but then I saw the pay they were offering. It was more than what I usually made. A lot more. I've always been good with kids, and I figured, why not? The house wasn't too far, and it would give me something to do, not to mention some extra cash. So I agreed, though part of me still hesitated as I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. When I pulled up to the house, I immediately noticed how big it was. The house was at least 3 stories, with white painted siding that gleamed in the dimming light. The large front porch had intricate columns and big windows that made the house look grand and imposing. I didn't know it at the time, but looking back, I realized how odd it was that this house seemed so secluded from the rest of the neighborhood. The trees surrounding it were tall, casting long shadows across the yard. The whole place felt like it was hidden away, as if it was trying to keep something secret. I parked my car on the long, winding driveway and got out. The ground was littered with a few dead leaves that had fallen from the trees, crunching under my shoes as I made my way to the door. I tried to shake the unease I felt creeping up on me. It wasn't that I was scared, but more like there was something off. I rang the doorbell, and it took a minute before anyone answered. When the door finally opened, a woman greeted me with a big smile that seemed a little too wide for comfort. She was in her mid-40s, I'd say, and her clothes looked nice but kind of outdated, like she had been stuck in the 90s. She introduced herself as Mrs. Davis and welcomed me inside with an air of politeness. "Rachel, right? Thank you so much for coming," she said, ushering me into the house. The smell of something faintly floral lingered in the air, and the place was quiet, almost too quiet. The floors were polished wood, and the walls were lined with what looked like family portraits, some of them old, some of them more recent. The furniture was bulky, classic, and way too formal for my taste, like a showroom you'd find in some antique store. Mrs. Davis led me to the living room, where she explained that her baby, Noah, was upstairs sleeping, and that I should keep an eye on him while she and her husband went out to a dinner party. She gave me some quick instructions on where the baby's things were, how to contact her in case anything went wrong, and a few more details that I barely listened to because I was too busy looking around. Everything felt so still, like there was no sound, no background noise. "The nursery's just upstairs," she said. "He's a really easy baby, so you shouldn't have any problems. You know, I just realized we forgot to put away some of his toys. It's probably nothing, but if you want to put them in the basket over there, that would be a big help." He's been crawling around a lot more these days, and we don't want him tripping." I nodded absently, trying to be polite. Her smile never wavered. After Mrs. Davis gave me a quick rundown of things, she kissed Noah on the forehead and left, leaving me alone in the giant house. For a few minutes, I just stood there, letting the silence settle around me. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock in the corner and the sound of my own breath filling the space. The house was too big for just one baby, and it felt so strange being alone in it. I made my way upstairs to check on Noah, peering into the nursery. He was in his crib, wrapped snugly in a blanket, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. I smiled at the sight. He looked so peaceful, so unaware of anything that might be going on outside his little world. I left him alone after making sure he was comfortable, and then I went back downstairs to settle in for what I thought would be a quiet night. But then, around 9 p.m., I heard it. A soft knock on the door. It wasn't loud, just a gentle tap. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then the knocking came again, a little louder this time. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't that I was scared exactly. I didn't want to seem like a nervous wreck. But there was something about it that felt wrong. I stood frozen, trying to think of any reason why anyone would be knocking at the door. No one was supposed to come by. Mrs. Davis hadn't mentioned any visitors. I walked to the front door, trying to keep calm, and peered through the peephole. At first, I didn't see anyone. But then, I noticed a figure standing just at the edge of the porch. It was an elderly woman, bent over slightly, her gray hair tied back in a messy bun. She was wearing an old, faded floral dress and a cardigan that was stretched out at the elbows. She looked frail, her face pale and lined with age. The kind of woman you might expect to see in an old photo album from your grandparents. I hesitated, feeling that uncomfortable feeling in my chest tighten. Something wasn't right. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, locked onto the peephole. She raised one hand slowly, waving at me as if she knew I was there, watching. For a moment, I couldn't move. I wasn't sure what to do. I opened the door just a crack, the chain still latched. "Yes?" I asked, my voice sounding far steadier than I felt. The woman looked at me and smiled, but it wasn't a warm, kind smile. It was strained, as though it took everything she had to force it out. "I'm so sorry to bother you, dear," she said, her voice shaky but still polite. "I live just next door, and there's been a power outage at my house. I was hoping I could borrow your phone." I was immediately suspicious. I didn't know anyone in the neighborhood who was old enough to live alone, and even if there was, I couldn't just let some stranger inside my employer's house. "I'm sorry, but I can't let anyone inside," I said, my voice a little firmer this time. "I'm babysitting." The woman didn't seem upset, though. She simply nodded slowly, her wide eyes still staring at me with unnerving intensity. She didn't take a step back. Instead, she lingered on the porch, still staring at me. For a moment, we both stood there in silence, and I could feel her gaze like a weight pressing down on me. It was as if she was waiting for something, waiting for me to make the next move. But when she didn't say anything else, I slowly shut the door, the chain rattling slightly as it clicked into place. I turned and looked back toward the baby monitor. Noah was still sleeping soundly, but that uncomfortable feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. It was a message from Mrs. Davis, confirming she and her husband were on their way to the dinner party and asking if everything was going well. I quickly texted back, saying everything was fine, but the strange encounter with the elderly woman lingered in my mind. I tried to ignore the unsettling feeling gnawing at me, but it wasn't easy. The house, though beautiful, felt too quiet, too still. The kind of quiet where every creak of wood, every soft sound felt like it was amplified. The kind of quiet that makes your thoughts feel louder than they should be, and you can't help but think about every little detail until you convince yourself something is wrong. And that was exactly what happened. I tried to focus on the book I had been reading earlier, but the words blurred together as I kept glancing up toward the front door, expecting the woman to appear again. I had locked everything before, and I made sure to double-check the doors once more. But for some reason, every lock felt insufficient, like it wasn't enough to protect me from whatever was out there. I could have sworn I heard something faint, a rustling sound coming from somewhere upstairs. It wasn't Noah's cries, it was something else. A soft shuffle of footsteps, maybe? I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. There was that strange old woman, the uncomfortable, forced smile, the way she stared at me through the peephole, and why hadn't she left after I turned her down? Why had she just stood there, lingering, as if waiting for something? The baby monitor sitting on the coffee table flickered to life, a brief moment of static followed by a faint crackling sound. I froze, heart leaping into my throat. I glanced over at the screen. Noah was still in his crib, peacefully asleep. But as the static cleared, I thought I saw a figure move in the hallway outside the nursery. I blinked and stared harder. Nothing. Noah still slept soundly, his small body rising and falling gently with each breath. I shook my head, thinking maybe the monitor was just malfunctioning. The baby wasn't moving, after all. Maybe it was the weird angle or the flickering lights that made it look like something shifted. But the feeling in my stomach didn't go away. The longer I stared at the monitor, the more sure I became that I had seen something. Something moving. Something. Or someone. My pulse quickened. I couldn't just sit here waiting for my mind to play tricks on me. Without really thinking, I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a long, sharp kitchen knife from the counter. My hands were trembling, but I gripped the handle so tightly I thought my fingers might cramp. The knife felt too big for my hands, but I held onto it as if it was the only thing that could protect me. My heart thudded in my chest as I crept up the stairs, trying to move as quietly as possible. The house was still. Too still. No sound of footsteps, no whispers, just the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the sound of my breath filling my ears. I reached the top of the stairs and paused. The hallway stretched out before me, dark and narrow, with doors leading into rooms on either side. I could barely see anything beyond the light from the stairwell. The nursery door was just ahead, cracked slightly open. I had left it fully closed earlier, but now it was open just enough to make my skin crawl. The knot in my stomach tightened. I felt like I was walking in slow motion, my feet barely making a sound as I moved toward the nursery. Every creak of the floorboards beneath me felt like a bomb going off in the silence. I could hear my own breathing now, shallow and quick, as I reached out and pushed the nursery door open. The room looked untouched. Noah was still lying peacefully in his crib, his tiny face relaxed in sleep, his fingers curled slightly. For a moment, I stood there trying to convince myself that everything was fine, that nothing was wrong. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The closet. It was the way the bifold doors were slightly open, just wide enough that I could see a pair of bare feet sticking out from beneath the clothes hanging there. I felt my breath catch in my throat. For a moment, I thought I must have been seeing things. Maybe it was just the shadow playing tricks on my eyes. But no, there they were, bare feet, hidden behind the fabric, partially covered in the shadow of the closet. I took a step backward, my heart racing in my chest. My first instinct was to call out, but I couldn't bring myself to make a sound. I didn't know if I was being paranoid or if something was really happening, but I couldn't just stand there. I had to do something. Suddenly, the closet door swung wide open with a loud bang. A man. He lunged out at me, his face twisted in a mixture of rage and terror. His clothes were dark and unremarkable, just a simple jacket and jeans. He didn't say anything, just lunged at me with a speed I wasn't expecting. My heart leapt into my throat as I instinctively stepped back, but he was already too close. In a panic, I slashed out with the knife, trying to protect myself. The blade connected with his arm and he let out a sharp hiss, stumbling back, but he didn't stop. His face contorted in anger, and he growled low in his throat, his eyes narrowing as he staggered toward me again. I didn't know what to do. I was paralyzed for a split second, unsure whether to run or keep fighting. Then I heard the sound of Noah crying from his crib. It broke through the fog of panic in my head. I had to get to him. I had to protect him. I swung the knife again at the man, and he stumbled back and tripped. I immediately ran toward the crib, scooping Noah up as quickly as I could. His little body was trembling in my arms, and his cries were louder now. I could feel my own heart pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. I turned and bolted for the stairs. Every step was a blur, my mind fixated on getting to safety. But the man was right behind me. I could hear his footsteps pounding behind me, each one a reminder that I wasn't safe yet. I reached the bottom of the stairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I slammed through the living room and straight into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I set Noah down, still crying, on the floor beside me as I fumbled for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost couldn't hold it, but I managed to dial 911. The phone rang once, twice. I could feel my chest tightening as I waited, praying someone would pick up. Finally, I heard the operator's voice. I could barely speak. My words were frantic and broken as I explained what had happened, what I had seen, and what I was still hearing. "Stay on the line, ma'am. We're sending officers right now. Stay inside, lock the door. Help is on the way." But I didn't feel safe. The man was still out there. He was still in the house. I sat there, huddled in the small, dimly lit bathroom with Noah in my lap. I tried to calm him as best as I could, whispering soft words that I didn't even know if he could understand, but my mind was racing. Every sound, every creak in the house sent my pulse spiking. Was he still in the house? Was he coming for us? I could hear noises now from somewhere in the house, faint but unmistakable. The sound of furniture scraping, footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors, followed by a soft thud, then another thud, like someone walking through the house searching for us. The minutes felt like hours, and I kept thinking back to that woman, the one who had knocked on the door earlier. Had she been a distraction? Had she led me into this? Maybe she was in on it. Maybe the whole thing had been planned from the start. I kept my back pressed to the bathroom door, clutching the phone in my hand like it was the only thing that could save me. The 911 operator had told me to stay inside, stay locked up, and wait for the police. But with each second that ticked by, my fear only grew. Minutes later, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance, faint at first, but growing louder. The police were finally on their way. I tried to keep calm, but my nerves were stretched thin, and every sound made my heart skip a beat. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the front door slam open and the sound of heavy boots echoing through the house. Shouting followed voices, commands, the unmistakable sound of the police clearing the house. Relief washed over me, but I was still paralyzed, still too scared to move. 2 officers came into the bathroom, quickly checking the room and surrounding areas. One of them knelt next to me, gently prying Noah from my arms. He reassured me that everything would be okay. They would find the intruder. They would make sure no one else was in the house. They searched every corner of the house. It felt like hours before they came back to me. "I don't know how to explain this," one of the officers said, looking uneasy. "But the man you saw, he's gone. We've searched the entire property. There's no sign of him. There is, however, a broken latch on the nursery window. We think he might have entered through there while you were distracted by the woman you mentioned in your call. We found out that there is no elderly woman living next door. She was not the real neighbor. The man you saw in the closet? He was likely her accomplice. using the distraction to break in and wait for you to let your guard down. I never found out who they were. The police never caught the suspects. I never found out why she and her accomplice had chosen me that night, why they had targeted that house. My name's Jenna, and I'm just a college student trying to make a little extra cash. A couple of weeks ago, I got a babysitting job for this well-off family who lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood in California. Their house was huge, one of those old homes with a lot of character, but also a lot of creaky floorboards and weird nooks and crannies. I had been there before, so I was familiar with it. The house, while beautiful, always gave off a sense of being both charming and slightly eerie. It was the kind of house that had creaky steps and hallways that seemed to whisper with the wind. The couple, Tim and Sarah, were going out for dinner, and they left me in charge of their two kids, 6-year-old William and 4-year-old Lily. They seemed like sweet kids, and everything had been fine at first. I showed up around 6 p.m., had a nice little chat with the parents, and then they left. Sarah gave me all the instructions she normally did, telling me about their bedtime routine, and reminded me to lock all the doors before I let the kids go to bed. I didn't mind. Babysitting wasn't new to me. I had done it plenty of times, and this family was always very nice. They had specific rules, of course, but they were never difficult to follow. It felt comfortable, like any other evening. After Sarah left, I began to settle into the rhythm of the night. By 8 p.m., after a quiet dinner, I had the kids tucked into their bedrooms. William's room was down the hall from the living room, and Lily's was just next to the kitchen. I was in the living room, on the couch, watching some mindless TV to pass the time. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, except for the occasional hum of the refrigerator or the low whistle of wind through a gap in the window. The house was old, but I always thought it added to its charm. Tonight, though, it felt colder somehow. Not literally, just this weird, unsettling feeling, as though something was slightly off in the air. That's when I started hearing it. Soft footsteps, slow, methodical, like someone was walking across the upstairs hall. My heart skipped. I glanced at the staircase leading upstairs. The house was old and the stairs always creaked, but this was different. The sound didn't fade like usual. It was almost like someone was walking deliberately just above me. I checked the kids' rooms. Both were fast asleep. There was no reason for anyone to be upstairs. I figured maybe it was the wind. The house had a lot of weird noises after all. Maybe I was just being paranoid. I had spent a lot of time in old houses and knew that they often had a life of their own when it came to strange sounds. The walls settled, the wood groaned, and there were always creaks and moans as the house shifted. I tried to dismiss it and focused back on the TV, but I couldn't shake the unease that settled in my chest. But then it happened again. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate. I froze. My body tensed as I tried to figure out where the sound was coming from. I had been so sure that no one was upstairs. My stomach twisted in knots. The house was empty, except for me and the kids. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just the house settling, but the sound kept going, each step more pronounced than the last. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The footsteps stopped. I didn't hear anything for what felt like forever. Holding my breath, I stared at the staircase, trying to see if anything moved in the shadows at the top. Nothing. No figures, no movement. It was just the shadows, stretching and distorting with the dim light from the hallway. Maybe I was just imagining things. Then I heard something else. The faintest sound of a door creaking open upstairs. It was the kind of sound you only hear when something heavy shifts on a hinge, a soft but distinct groan that made my skin crawl. I felt my heart race. My mind was racing even faster. There was no way I was hearing things. There was someone in the house. I rushed to the kids' rooms, my pulse pounding in my ears. I pushed open William's door, then Lily's. Both were still asleep, blissfully unaware of whatever was happening outside their doors. I couldn't let them stay in their rooms alone. I couldn't risk them being caught in whatever was going on upstairs. I had to act, and I had to act fast. I woke them both up, my voice shaky, but trying to sound calm. "Hey, sweetie, we need to go somewhere safe, okay?" I didn't wait for them to fully register what I said. They were still drowsy and confused, but I bundled them together, grabbing their blankets, and then hurriedly locked ourselves in one of the rooms with a sturdy deadbolt. The walls felt like they were closing in around me as I secured the door. Shaking uncontrollably, I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could hardly dial 911. The screen kept blurring, and my fingers felt numb. It was like time was moving too slowly, and my brain couldn't keep up with the panic rising in my chest. The dispatcher picked up, her voice calm and detached, a stark contrast to the terror running through me. "911, what's your emergency?" "There's someone in the house," I whispered urgently, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think they're upstairs. I'm with 2 kids. I don't know who it is, but they're not supposed to be here." "Stay where you are," she said, her voice a bit too calm for my liking. "We have officers on the way. Can you lock all the doors and stay quiet?" I tried to focus on what she was saying, but every minute felt like an eternity. My heart raced, each beat thundering in my chest as I huddled in the room with the kids. Their soft breathing in the dark, unaware of the danger outside the door, was the only thing keeping me grounded. But even that did little to settle the knot of fear in my stomach. I kept staring at the door, straining to hear any sound, anything that would tell me what was happening out there. The silence stretched on, becoming unbearable. The house, which usually felt cozy and inviting, now felt like a prison. Every creak of the floorboards outside the room, every wind gust rattling the window, seemed to amplify my fear. I couldn't stop thinking about the footsteps. How long had they been going on? How long had someone been upstairs? I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. I just had to wait, hoping the police would get here in time. The sound of sirens finally reached my ears, and I felt a wave of relief. At last, I wasn't alone. The officers arrived quickly, and I heard them pounding on the front door. I didn't move until I heard them announce themselves. "Jenna, are you okay?" A man's voice called from the front door. I bolted to the door and flung it open. My legs felt weak beneath me, but I forced myself to stand tall as the officers moved quickly, sweeping through the house room by room, their flashlights slicing through the shadows. One of them ascended the stairs first while I stayed behind with the others, holding the kids close and silently pleading that everything would turn out all right. Minutes passed before we heard a shout from upstairs. The officers descended soon after, dragging a disheveled man down the stairs. He was thin, his clothes tattered, his face smeared with dirt. His matted hair suggested he hadn't bathed in weeks. The man looked dazed, almost as if he didn't fully understand where he was or what was happening. "He's been living in the attic," one officer explained, his voice calm but with an edge of disbelief. I couldn't believe it. How long had he been hiding up there? Had he been watching us this whole time? The thought made me shudder. Officer arrested him and led him away, his handcuffs clinking with every step. I stared after them, still trying to process what had just happened. The relief washed over me in waves, but the lingering feeling of violation was something I knew I wouldn't shake for a long time. I looked down at the kids, both of them wide-eyed and frightened, but still safe. I held them close, whispering that it was okay, that everything was fine now. Though I comforted them as best I couldn't help but feel that the image of that man lurking in the darkness would stay with me long after that night. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.